With the help of Hashem, we are learning Moed Katan Daf Chaf Aleph. We left off on Daf Chaf Aleph, Amid Aleph, 4 lines from the top of the Amid. We are dedicating this class Le'ilui Nishmas Tzipoira Bas Arya Halevi. We're continuing to learn the sugya regarding Kriya, that Kriya must be done while standing, and we are looking for a source. We're going to have on Daf Chaf Aleph a Braisa that's going to enumerate all the different things that are forbidden to a Avel. We're going to learn about the Isser for an Avel to put on Tefillin, and we're going to explain how that restriction is only for the first day of one's Avelus. We're going to learn that there's also a particular severity by an Avel which is connected to the first 3 days of the Shiva versus the final 4 days or 3 days and a bit, or just a bit of the 7th day. We're going to learn many details regarding the Isser for an Avel to engage in She'ilas Sholem. She'ilas Sholem, many people translate loosely as you can't greet each other normally. And actually, by the letter of the law, it doesn't mean that. Good morning is not halachically fully included in the problem of She'ilas Sholem. She'ilas Sholem really is explicitly, specifically for using the word Sholem, which is also one of the names of Hashem, by saying Shalom Aleichem or by responding Aleichem HaSholem. And this She'ilas Sholem exchange, we're going to learn how that affects a person during Shiva, during Shloishim, during the 12 months if a person is mourning for his father or mother. And the final case we're going to have on Daf Chaf Aleph will be the following: that if you have an Avel, we're speaking about an immediate relative that was unaware of the passing when the passing happened, but it's a Shmua Kereva. This person not only heard it within 30 days, this person heard it a day or two after the burial. And this immediate relative went or came to join his family who already began the Shiva right after the burial, as one needs to. Question is, can this newcomer conclude his or her Shiva with the remaining of the family because they're sitting together? Or do we say, no, it's a Shmua Kereva, you have to keep a full 7 days of the Shiva? And we're going to elaborate when we learn this case inside. This is an amazing concept. In other words, maybe Shiva is not a chiyuv on the Gavra. Maybe you have to have the family sitting Shiva. And as long as a mourner is joining the Shiva, even though he came late, we'll see limitations, whether he can come anytime during the Shiva or he must come during the first 3 days of the Shiva, other preconditions according to some Amoraim, then we'll see a concept that this individual will not have to sit the full Shiva, because since he joined the family that began it right after the burial, he can conclude the Shiva with them, and many other details. Chavra, let us start on Daf Chaf Aleph, Amid Aleph, 4 lines from the top of the Amid. And again, behemshech to what we learned regarding a source that Kriya has to be done standing. Says the Gemara, Amar Rami Bar Chama. From where do we know that Kriya has to be done standing? Shenemar, quoting the same pasuk we had at the end of yesterday's shir, quoting the last line on Daf Chaf Amid Beis, Vayakam Iyov Vayikra, when he heard that Rachmana litzlan, his children, passed away. So the fact that it says that he stood up, that's a raya that you have to stand up. And there the Gemara challenges the following: Dilma, perhaps Milsa Yiser Tehuda Avid. Maybe you're not mechuyev to do kriya, to rent your garments when you're standing. In other words, all of this will be a challenge on Ameimar, that Ameimar, we had the case, he ripped his garments 3 times. And one of the reasons why he added one of the additional times was because he did it initially while sitting. Well, Frek Gemara, maybe Iyuv did something beyond the letter of the law. How do you know from this pasuk that if you did not do it while you're standing, it's invalid and you must rent your garments again? Furthermore, I know that Iyuv did certain things that are beyond the letter of the law, because it says regarding Iyuv, Vayagaz es roishoi, that Iyuv, he tore the hair out of his head from tsar. Now, tearing the hair out of one's head, let's not get into the issue of it might even be problematic, but it's certainly not an obligation. But hachinami, that it's an obligation, it's not. So since we find that Iyuv did certain things that are beyond the obligations, maybe renting the garments dafka while standing is also beyond the minimum obligation. So therefore this is not to be used as a source. Ela mehachem. When it says Vayakam Hamelech Vayikra Es Begadov, this pasuk is regarding David Hamelech, that when he heard that Avshalom killed all of his children, and that was not correct. Avshalom did kill Amnon, Kiyadua. But when he heard that he lost his children, it says again that the king stood up and he rent his garments. So the Gemara has the same kasha. Vidilma milsi yasersa of it. Maybe again, David HaMelech did something that you're not mechuyev to do. So how would Ameimar know from over here that if he rent his garments, but since he wasn't standing, how do you know that you have to do it again? And the Iloi Teimahacha, again another attempted proof that David HaMelech, he engaged in behaviors that are beyond the obligation, where it says Vayishkav Arza, that David laid, which means he slept on the ground. We don't have to sleep on the ground. There is an obligation, as it used to be, to turn over the beds. But here this is beyond turning over the bed and sleeping on the other side of the bed, but not on the ground. But hachinami, is everyone mechuyev to sit on the ground? It's not true. V'hatanya, we learned explicitly in Abraisa. Now I know, my friends, that in our Gemara it says the word yashav. But there are many that correct that the Braisa actually says yashan. Then it mamash fits. It's the Braisa says that yashan al gabe mita. If a mourner, didn't overturn the bed, which is what you're supposed to do, all he did was he took off the mattress and he slept. It's called today the springboard, or the ropes that we learned about just in the previous Masechtas, or if he slept on a chair, or if a mourner slept al gabi udiyane gedoyla, some sort of large mortar. In other words, he made himself uncomfortable, or al gaba har karka, or on the ground, says the Braisa mikulam lo yatsi yedei chavasei, that he didn't fulfill his obligation. Now, what obligation are we talking about? And Rabbi Yochanan clarified that what does the Braisa mean? Shalekiyam kfiyas hamita. Up until the times where the Jewish people decided that we're no longer going to engage in kfiyas hamita, like we mentioned, one of the reasons is because there was a danger that the goyim are going to suspect the Yidden of practicing sorcery. But the Me'ikar Adin, we used to do Kfiyas Hamita. So Kfiyas Hamita doesn't mean sleeping on the ground, doesn't mean sleeping on the springboard. It means turning the bed upside down. Bottom line is that we see that David HaMelech went beyond the letter of the law, like Iyuv. So it's not a proof. So the Gemara says that's not correct. That Amar Lei, when it says in the pasuk that King David slept or he laid on the ground, it doesn't mean he laid on the ground. It means he turned his bed over. And therefore it is ke'ein arza. It's as uncomfortable as laying on the ground. David HaMelech, therefore, didn't do anything that you see in scripture that was beyond the letter of the law. And therefore we're going to say that when it says Vayakam HaMelech Vayikra Es Begadov, that is the letter of the law, and that is the source that Kriya must be done dafka while you're standing, to the point that if someone did Kriya while sitting, they have to redo it, as was the story with Ameimar. Tana Rabbanan, says the Gemara, we learned in a Braisa, and we're going to use the version without the letter Vav. The Braisa is going to enumerate that Elu Devarim Sha'aval Asur Bahem. Number one, Asur B'Malacha. A novel is not allowed to engage in Malacha. Very important to have the clarity that Malacha here does not mean what it means for Hilchas Shabbos, for Hilchas Yom Tov, for Hilchas Chol HaMoed. Malacha means physical, strenuous labor. Or it means, even if it's not strenuous, if it's not a Davar Ha'aved, we'll get to more details later, then he should not have that work done if the business belongs to him. Now the Arhetadim, if it's something that is going to be a loss, then he can engage in it, at least try to minimize it. Again, just to mention that it's common practice that people that are in Avelus, they would write a document gifting their business to someone else during the days of the Shiva. But there was a very generic issue that they're not allowed to work. Number one, uberechitza, they may not bathe. Ubesicha, they may not anoint themselves. Ubetashmish hamita, they may not have marital relations. Ubeni'ilas asandal, they may not wear leather shoes. And now let's come to the limitations regarding learning Torah. Also, likros b'Torah, they may not read not Torah, not Nevi'im, not Ksuvim, nor v'lishnois b'Mishnah, to learn Mishnayos, to learn Medrash, to learn Halachos, to learn Talmud. So in other words, the Baraisa was written before the Gemara was written, but still, then when they learned Mishnayos by heart, they added all the explanations that was later compiled into what we call the Talmud. So people had it by heart, but they had the Talmud. They may not learn Gemara, nor in Agadata, uba Agadas. However, here we go to exceptions. If the Aval was someone who gave classes, he's a Magid Shir. If he's not going to learn, many people won't learn Torah, then Einoi Nimna, then he should not refrain the learning of Torah. Tragedy, Rabbi Yossi lost his son, and yet during the time of the Shiva, the Nichnas lebeis hamedrash v'darash kol hayom kulei, or during the Shloshim. Bottom line is, he had a din of it during the Shiva. During the Shloshim, everyone can learn Torah. Wow. Means during the Shiva, he didn't sit Shiva. He went to the Beis Medrash and he gave a class. Rabba Bar Bar Chana, also Isra Le'bei Milsa, some relative passed away, and Savar D'Loila Meipak Lepirka. Now Rabba Bar Bar Chana gave classes, so he thought he's in Shiva. He's not going to go to give the lecture. Amalei Rab Chanina, it's not true. He quoted the Baraisa that we just learned, that Im Hoyer Rabim Tzrichim Loi, that if there is a need for the public, because he regularly gives Sheyurei Torah, Einoi Nimna, then he should not refrain, and he told him to give a shir during the Shiva. Now, the way Magidei Shiurim would give a shir in the times of Chazal is that the great scholar, the Tana, the Amoira, would give a class. He would speak perhaps in the holy tongue. He definitely would not make an effort to speak using a loud voice. And sometimes he would speak in short. And there would be someone standing next to him called a Amoira. Thus, all of the Chachamim from the times of the Gemara are called Amoirayim. The word Amoira means a speaker. The word Amoira means a translator. The Amoira had a booming, strong voice. And sometimes the Amoira would elaborate more when he would notice that the people need some background information for them to better understand. So he was told to give a shir. So he's going to give a shir. He thought that he's going to give a shir the way he always does it, by having a speaker stand at its side. That not. So Amar Lei Rav, no, Tanya. We did also learn a detail. There is a limit. Even the person that the Rabbim tzrichim loy, and they give a shir. Imagine during the Shiva in the Beis Medrash. Nevertheless, turgaman, but that person should not have a turgaman, this speaker, this interpreter. That's already too much. So there's already a shinui. So the question is, what should one do? Now, obviously, one option would be just not to have a speaker, but they were not used to speaking without a speaker. Some of these Amoraim Mistama had hundreds or maybe thousands of Talmidim. It doesn't matter the number, it's just a large crowd, and they don't project their voices. So there is a heter, there is a way how to solve it. We're going to be learning so many Tanoim Amoraim that lost children. It's mamash, it breaks your heart. So the son of Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Eloi, the great Rabbi Yehuda, the Rosh HaMedabrim, his son passed away. And during Shiva v'nichnas lebeis hamedrash, he went into the Beis Hamedrash because he gave daily lectures. V'nichnas Rab Chananya ben Akavia v'Yoshav b'tzidoi, the first white line. So his solution was, he had another colleague that sat at his side. V'lachashu l'Rab Chananya ben Akavia. Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Eloi, he spoke softly, the way he always spoke so softly, because they had the speaker. So he spoke to Rab Chananya. Rab Chananya repeated what he said to the Turgaman, to the speaker, to the interpreter, to the booming voicer. And the Turgaman Ishmi Allah Rabim Gavaldik. In other words, they just had one more person in the link. As long as the speaker was not repeating directly from the Aval, it's okay. Gavaldik. Tan Rabbanan, we learned in the Brais. Chavre, the second wide line. Avel, Gimel, Yamim, Harishainim, for the first 3 days, Asr, Leoneach, Tfilin. Wow. For the first 3 days of Shiva, and Avel may not put on Tfilin. Now we're going to learn, if I'm not mistaken, on Daf Chav Gimel, in 2 daf from now, not next daf, but in 2 daf from now, the laws of an oinen. An oinen, which is these immediate relatives, prior to burial have a status of an oinen, or in the plural, aninus. That's a period in which they don't put on tefillin. And here we are learning that even after the burial, they started the days of Avelus, for the first 3 days they don't put on tefillin. Now I just want to share...
Private or publicly?
Oh, very good, Kavan. So just to make it clear that we don't paskin at all this way, that if there is a restriction, we're going to go to those who hold that it's only for the first day, And even in the first day, nowadays it's only not put on in public, but they put it on in private. But let's begin learning. I want to add a very interesting Yerushalmi that gives one of the many insights about the 3 days. There are many halachas in which the first 3 days of mourning is considered more severe. And that is that the neshama, look at this, the Alter Rebbe clarifies this in Tanya Nigeres, Chav Zayin. So you have the nefesh, ruach, and neshama. Let's speak about the 3 lower. Nefesh, ruach, and neshama. The nefesh always remains with the body. The ruach, the neshama, goes to Gan Eden. The ruach can be here and be there. It can be down here, it can go up. And it takes a while for the ruach, or generally, using the very generic word, for the neshama to say goodbye to its body. And even though after the burial it's free to go up, it doesn't want to. And in many cases it hovers, it stays near the body for the first 3 days. So the Yerushalmi says, what's the 3 days? That physically after 3 days the body begins to decompose to the point, I know it's just relatively a little, but it's decomposed enough where the neshama understands that it's not coming back to this body before Tchiyas HaMesim. That is when it leaves. It's amazing. And once the neshama begins to go to Gan Eden, once the neshama goes up, it's not such a serious mourning. It says the neshama already begins to find its new home. The neshama is very sad during the first 3 days because it wants to be here but it can't. And so we mirrored, the Avelim mirrored that sadness by having this highest level of mourning down over here. Very interesting. Okay. Now here we guys, we have to be medayik. Here it says for the first 3 days you can't put on tefillin. So normally you would say from the 4th day on. But the Braisa doesn't say that. The Braisa says from the 3rd day and on. What's pshat? Mixas hayoim kekulei. So even this most chamor opinion that speaks about the Isur for 3 days, it doesn't mean 3 full days, it means the day of burial. And by the way, the day of burial doesn't have to be a full day. If the burial was before Shkia, 5 minutes before Shkia, right, and there were some, they took off their leather shoes, so they began to practice mourning, that's day number 1. Day number 2 is a full day, and day number 3 would only mean the beginning of day number 3. The beginning of day number 3. Verstehst? And once, it was in the morning. But once they practice in the early part of day number 3 not to put on tefillin, then that's the Braisovish that from the 3rd day and on, and it could include the 3rd day, muter leniach tefillin. Now, Chevra, in those days, they would wear tefillin the whole daytime. So says this Tana, Rabbi Eliezer, when do we say that from the 3rd day and on they can wear tefillin? That's only if no one else is there being menachem avol. Avol ve'imbo panam chadashes. But if someone comes, someone that was not there before, if someone comes today that was here yesterday, he saw the avol did not put on the 2nd day, he'll know that this avol knows what he's doing. He put it on the 3rd day because he refrained earlier on, and he put it on a little bit later than the normal time. But if this is an individual that was never here before, so then the din is, you don't have to say take it off. You don't say maybe the Panim Chadashas will suspect for the Avel to having worn it also on day number 2 and on day number 1. We don't say that. He can keep it on. So holds Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer has a chumrah and a kula. He has a chumrah in the context we want to put on tefillin. Chumrah is that you can't put on tefillin for the first 3 days. Okay, not whole 3 days, but you have to enter the 3rd day. On the other hand, once you enter the part of the 3rd day and you are putting on tefillin, you don't have to take it off when people come to visit you. Rabbi Yeshua says, Aval beis yamim harishonim, that an aval is less time. Only for the first 2 days is it when he may not put on tefillin. And by the way, like Rabbi Eliezer, it's not full 2 days. He only has to refrain on the 2nd day in the beginning of the day. So umisheni v'sheni b'chlal. Once he refrained a little bit the 2nd day, then onwards, even on the 2nd day, he's allowed to put on tefillin. So he's more lenient, meaning he allows another day of tefillin. But now on the other side of the coin, the imbo panam chadashos. But if someone comes, right, that was not here on day number 1, he only came on day number 2, and he sees this yid, this avel sitting with tefillin, he's going to think maybe he put it on day number 1, so not to arouse suspicion, chaylitz, he should take it off. Which is
Where did he get the fact that he can't do that on the second day? Where's the source?
I think it's all connected to what we quoted in the Yerushalmi. In other words, I think that the aliyah of the neshama is gradual. It's not radical, it's gradual. So maybe there's, after the first day, the neshama doesn't want to leave. The second day, it begins to leave. And the more the neshama leaves, then the less the neshama is in tzar. The less the soul is in pain, the less we need to mirror that pain over here. In other words, mourning is not only about the mourners, it's about the neshama. There's a link. And the better it is for the neshama, then naturally, deep down, a heart feels a heart. Upon him, there's already a little bit of a diminution on the tsar. It's like our loss. It's a terrible loss. But on the other hand, if it's good for the one who departed, it's not that painful. Amar Rav Masna. Okay, Amar Rav Masna. My Tamad Rabbi Eliezer. Where did he get this 2 days plus a little bit? Because it says regarding the passing of Moshe Rabbeinu, Vayitmu Yimei B'chi Evel Moshe, and the days, right, of the tearful mourning of Moshe was completed. Days in plural. Now what's amazing is that it says days. Days is plural. He understands this to mean completed because you entered day number 3. So that's the pshat. 2 and a little bit. 2 and a little bit. And the little bit cannot be at night because no one puts on tefillin at night. The little bit means, like we mentioned, that if a person normally would put on tefillin right in the morning, they would wait a little bit and then they would only put it on later. Amar Rav Eino, what's the source of Rabbi Yeshua that he says really 1 day and a little bit? Because it says, and this is a pasuk regarding the people that God forbid persecute the poor, that God is going to bring suffering upon them. It says V'samtia ke'evil yachid. That's how the verse begins. That God will make them suffer, that they're going to be in such pain like someone who mourns for their only child. Rachmana litzlan. And then it says Va'achadisa, and their end will be like a bitter day. So we speak about, we evoke mourning. Bitter day, not days, day, which means that there is 1 day, the first day is the most bitter day. What does Rabbi Yeshua do with the pasuk that we quoted, Vayitmu Yimei, by Moshe Rabbeinu? So he'll tell you, well, Moshe Rabbeinu is different. Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, there the bitterness lasted for full, complete days, means it entered the 3rd day. The Takiv Evle. And Rabbi Eliezer, what does he do with the pasuk, Va'acharisa kiyoy mar? So he says, Iker merira chad yoimuhu. So he says very good that, yeah, it's gradual. No, he's not debating or denying the fact that the first day of Avelus, which is the day of the burial, again, as long as the burial is done before Shkia, that's the most bitter day. That's the most bitter day. Second day is not as bitter. But when it comes to this issur of putting on tefillin, which is called glory, so why are you glorifying yourself when there's so much pain? It doesn't go together. You add another day. Now, what are we paskin? Like Amarula, the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer b'chalitza, which means you don't need to remove it. We paskin like the lenient detail of Rabbi Eliezer, and we paskin like the lenient detail of Rabbi Yeshua regarding putting it on, that you can put it on already on the second day. Not immediately in the morning, but already you just stop, hold yourself back a little bit, mixas hayoim, and then you put it on. Now the question is, when it's a double dipper, because we're very lenient, by Avelos we always go like the lenient opinion. So what does it mean? B'sheni la'ula, when ula's paskening, does he mean b'sheni choylitz? What about on the second day? In other words, you can argue that maybe what he means regarding Rabbi Yeshua Bahanacha, that you can put it on the second day. We paskin like Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer never spoke about the second day. Rabbi Eliezer says that on the 3rd day, eino choylitz. But maybe, at least on the second day, be choylitz, or you don't even have to be choylitz on the second day. Like we're creating like a third opinion. So Tashema, Amar Ula, choylitz umaniach afilu mea pa'amim. We're not creating a third opinion. He's taka paskening very leniently. He's paskening the most lenient you can be. But on the second day, you have to remove it because that's what Rabbi Yeshua says. What he means to paskin is that from the 3rd day and on, you don't even have to remove it. Okay, Tanya Nami Hachi, that Yehuda ben Tema Omer, choylitz umaniach afilu mea pa'amim, that means you have to remove it. We're speaking about the second day of Avelus. So even though we paskin that you can already put on tefillin, after you refrained in the beginning, you have your mixas hayoim, you're putting on tefillin. Again, people used to wear tefillin the whole day. Anytime someone is being Menachem Avel, remove it. When they leave, put it back on. If someone else comes, remove it. Back and forth. all during the second day.
Bracha or no bracha?
No bracha. Very good, Kevin. Now Rava says, Rava's creating the biggest leniency. No, yeah, he disagrees. He says, Kevin shehiniach, once an avel is already allowed to put on tefillin, and again we paskin like Rabbi Yeshua on the second day. So really what it means, Kevin, is that here it's only restriction is only on the first day. Shuv einoi choylitz, then you don't have to take it off. Okay, says the Gemara that you should know that v'harava, or this akasha, v'harava hudam eraloch katan didan. Hold on. Now we're comparing two different cases. Our Mishnah, if you remember, was speaking about, we're referring to another din. When does Yom Tif cancel the Shiva? So we learned later on a Braisa that holds, and we paskin like that leaning in Braisa, that if you only just began the Avelus, you only just began the Shiva, the Yom Tov cancels it out, but that's not what we learned in the Mishnah. The Mishnah we discovered was Rabbi Eliezer holds, no, it's only if you had a 3 days of mourning. So frek the Gemara, how can Rava be lenient by saying, not the second day you can put on tefillin, and you don't even have to remove it? In other words, we remove the heaviness of Shiva already on day number 2. Didn't Rava Paskan Kitana Dedan the Amar Shloisha Daf Chafalo from it base Shloisha that you have to have 3 days for the regal to cancel. Not enough to have 2 days, certainly not enough 1 day. So Rava is more machmir regarding the cancellation. Answers the Gemara, don't compare apples and oranges. If you want to cancel Shiva, Rava taka paskan lochumra. Normally we paskin always like the leaning into pinyin, but Rava was machmir. But here we're speaking about the mitzvah of tefillin. You're telling a yid not to put on tefillin. Mitzvah shani. And let me just say, the bottom line is, Kevin asked before regarding tefillin of a mourner, that the Rebbe told many people, before the burial, if and when all of the hachanas for the burial was already made, as we'll learn, we're going to learn again on Daf Chav Gimel, the laws of Adninus. But the underlying halachic reason for why a oinen is basically exempt from all the positive commandments, including putting on tefillin. No, it's not only he doesn't make a brach, he doesn't put on tefillin. But that's only because we want him to be focused like a laser on the only task at hand, which is to make sure the burial happens, and the way we want for it to happen as soon as possible. Once all of the arrangements were made and there's nothing else for it to be done on the oinanim, then not everyone, some of us will put on tefillin as well, even by aninus. But coming back over here, me'ikar adin, as we see, an oinen b'chlal doesn't put on tefillin, and even the leaning into pinyin will hold that an avel only puts on tefillin on the second day, but we have in Shulchan Aruch that an avel will put on tefillin on the first day, but he'll only do it in private. Okay, weiter. Tana Rabbanim we learned in a Brais. Avel Gimel Yamim Arishonim. Again, this differentiation during the Shiva itself between the first 3 and the latter. It's not really 4 because the 4th day mixas hayoim, but it's the night and the morning. So Avel Gimel Yamim Arishonim is also b'malach. Furthermore, vafilu ani hamis parnas menat tzedakah. If this person is so poor, he doesn't have what to eat. Now, the tzedakah will give him money, but he doesn't want to live off charity. Even he may not do any melacha for the first 3 days. Wow! It's only bikan ve'elech. It's only after 3 days may the ani do malacha, because the ani doesn't have what to eat, and even that only in private. And similarly, a woman, we're speaking about in those days that normally women did not work, so they had the status of a poor person, and their livelihood came, this is just diber hakosav b'haiva, they would spin, they would make threads, they would make garments. So that's something called bitsina. Bitsina means something that you do in your home. So a woman, again, not the first 3 days, is toiva bepelach b'sech beisam. All right. Tana Rabbanim we learned in a Braisa of a mourner Gimel Yamim Arishonim for the first 3 days of their shiva. Eino ha'ilach lebeis ha'avel. They may not go to another house of mourning. You have 2 avelim in a community. Can they visit each other? So here again, interesting. Yeah, but not during the first 3 days. Mikan ve'elo chayilach. But listen to this. When they go, so what position do they take? Because you normally have the consolers, you have the ones who are the minachamin, And then you have the mourners that are receiving the condolences. So even though this avel is going to someone else's home, he sits with the mourners because this person is in their shiva. They don't sit with the consolers. They don't say the words Hamakim Menachem, which is Keminig by us Ashkenazim, or Min Hashemayim Yirachamu, Keminig the Sfardim. Ella, the avel visits, so it's nice. He's going to offer by being there, but he sits b'mekoim hamisnachamin. He sits with that other family. Tana Rabban in another brais. Avel Gilayam Marishainim for the first 3 days. Here we start again with many details. She'ila Shalom. That Amar writes explicitly, Safra the Maratov. In English, good morning is not She'ila Shalom, even though people beyond the letter of the law, those who are learned, won't even say that. But Me'ikir Adin, She'ila Shalom, there's something unique and special by using the word Shalom, Shalom, when you greet someone. Thus, Shalom Aleichem, Aleichem HaShalom. Let's focus Me'ikir on that. That Avel for the first 3 days, Asur B'She'ila Shalom. And as we'll see clearly, both it means he may not initiate, nor may he even respond. So guys, being that, again, we don't even say good morning. But if someone tells you good morning, not you, if someone tells a Avel good morning, nishkefelach to respond, every case is a case. But we'll see details, because they might get insulted. Now, Shalom you may not say. If they tell you Shalom, as we'll see, you explain to them that I'm not saying Aleichem HaShalom because I'm in my Avelus. Mishloisha va'at Shiva, but from the 3rd day and on, here again, whenever we learn about 3, we will always use the concept, the rule of Mixas Hayom Kekulei. So 3 means the first day, which is also just a little bit if it's before Shkia, the full 2nd day, and the beginning of the 3rd day. From the 3rd day and on until Shiva, until the end of the Shiva, Meshav, you respond, but ve'eina shoyel, you don't initiate. Mekan ve'elach, which means after Shiva, even though you are in your shloishim, someone is in the shloishim, shoyel Meshav kedarkoi. Remember this braisa, frekti gemarem, shloisha yamim arashayim, asur b'she'ila shalom, not to initiate, not to respond. V'hatanya, it says in braisa number 2, Maiso Meisu Banav Shal Rabbi Akiva Nachatana. Now actually many hold that Rabbi Akiva lost 1 child, so therefore the version must be Benoi. Be that as it may, when Rabbi Akiva was mourning for his child, or Banav for his children, Nichnusu Kol Yisrael V'Hispidum Hesped Gadol. Here everything is in the plural. So they, the children's, were eulogized by a tremendous amount of people. And b'shas petirasen, and when people left because they were going to the burial after the hesped, Amad Rabbi Akiva al safsal. Rabbi Akiva got up al safsal gadol. He stood up on a bench. He wanted for everyone to hear what he's saying. And va'amar that achenu beis Yisrael shimu, my brethren, listen. Afilu shnei banim chasanim. Now the sons that Rahman al passed away were single, and that's the biggest tragedy for the parent. Even a greater tragedy is if a child is married. So then the parents are mourning, and the wife is mourning, and maybe the children are mourning. So Rabbi Akiva says, even if there would be 2 married sons, right? Menucham hu, he would be consoled. See how careful he was, Rabbi Akiva? Right? Bris krisel asfasayim. Right? Like we learned above, he meant himself. He was trying to say that even if there would have been a greater tragedy, the fact that so many people came to show up, he was very moved by that. He says that he, meaning Rabbi Akiva, would have been consoled. But he understood never to say that on him, God forbid. Menucham hu, he, me, would be consoled. Bishvul kavod sha'asisim. Now he understood that the kavod that was given not for his sons, it was given for him. But Rabbi Akiva understood no one is coming to Rabbi Akiva because his name is Akiva. They're coming to him because of the Torah that he learned. In other words, they demonstrated the kavod for Torah. And that's a schus for his sons, that his sons, post facto, they wanted to live. But since their passing brought about such a public demonstration of kavod ha-Torah, that was a schus for his sons. And that brought him, that gave him a lot of consolation. And b'chlal de ingen, to participate in a levaya, you never, what did we learn? We learned how many people is enough people, right? Kayoytze Mitzrayim, Kiflayim. If you have 1,200,000 people coming to a hesped, then there's enough people. If not, we're Mavatal Talmud Torah. The biggest chus is to be part of any part of a levaya of a eulogy, of a burial, v'chuli. So he says, Bishvil kovid shasisem. V'im bishvil Akiva basem. I know if you would have come for me, no one would have come just for Akiva. Harikam Akiva bashuk. Ela kach amartem. Why did all of you show up? Because you know that Toiras Elikov beliboy, that Rabbi Akiva, he was speaking about himself. It's because of the Torah that he has in his heart. And how beautiful. Just having Torah in your mind doesn't deserve that much kavod. It's better than nothing. But how much greater is if the Torah doesn't stay in the head, if the Torah goes into your heart. So therefore, v'kolchem sheschartem kaful, and which is why you have a double schar. Wow. And then he tells him, so he was very moved. Again, in other words, it's a merit. The demonstration of the kavod HaTorah. And that's the beauty when you make a eulogy and you speak about the midrash toivois of the person, of the niftar, of the nifteres. There's an upside to this. I know it's not our minig, but the beauty is that you're explaining why are all these people gathered to give kavod for that behavior, for that good midah, and it's machabed God and it's machabed the Torah, and the more people, the greater. And all of that becomes the schus of the person who passed away. But here's the kasha. Rabbi Akiva concluded with the words, L'chu livatechem l'shalom. Yeah, like we learned in Brachas, not Bishalom, but Lishalom. But here, now this is in the first 3 days. He wished them, the word, that's the key, Shalom. Answers the Gemara, that's different. Because there were so many people there. Kvoid Rabim Shani. Now, by the way, Kvoid Rabim doesn't have to be dafka when you had the amazing amount of people that came to be Menachem, Aval, and came to the Hesped and Levaya of Rabbi Akiva's son or sons. Could be a Rabim only means 10. Doesn't matter. The point is that when the Braisa says that during the first 3 days you may not even respond, that's when it's an individual, not a Rabbim. Weiter. It says in the Braisa, Megimel Vad Zayin, nation means you can respond. But the Ein Shoyel, you cannot initiate. Mekan ve'elach. Mekan ve'elach means even during the Shloishim. Shoyelu meishiv kidarkoi oy geval. It means you can even initiate during the Shloishim. That's a problem. Viriminu, we're going to call this now Braisa number 2. It says, you didn't get a chance to be Menachem Avel. He's your friend. And Chol Yisrael Chaverim. So what do? Says the Braisa that if you met him during Shloishim, so even though you missed the mitzvah of doing Nichum Avelim while they were sitting Shiva, so what? They're still in the Shloishim. Medaber imoy tanchumen, which means you offer the general words of Hamakim Menachem Eschem, and therefore juxtapose, since you're being Menachem Avel, ve'eina shoyel b'shloimai. You don't say Shalom Aleichem. You see, that's the contradiction. Here we're seeing that in the Shloishim there are restrictions for She'ilah Shalom. But let's keep on learning Braisa number 2. After 30 days, even though you never offered the person Nechumen, the shoyel b'shloimai ve'eina medaber imay tanchumen. You don't offer tanchum. It's too late. It's after Shloishim. Meisa ishtoi. Another din, and again more details will be on Daf Chav Gimel, that if a person's wife passed away, v'naseh isha acheres. Now normally we will see that a person has to wait for 3 yamim tovim to pass to marry, not erusin, to marry another wife, but there are exceptions. There are exceptions. Just give you one exception. If a person has very young children, then they are allowed to get married right away. The Gemara is going to tell us a story of someone who proposed to a second wife during the burial of his first, after she was buried when he was still in the cemetery. I mean, that's really pushing it. But he needed his kids, I think it was a sister, and we'll see over there, he needed help. Can't marry your wife's sister when the wife is alive. But over here, anyways, but if you get married, if he married another woman when he was allowed to, even though normally you could offer tanchumen during the shloishim, it's not respectful, because you're going into the wife of the second wife and you're going to say Amakim Menachem Eschem for the passing of the first wife. That's not sensitive for the current wife, that you're being Menachem Abel for the first one. But when you find this person in the market during the shloishim, then yeah, again, he's already remarried, so you have to be a little bit more delicate. Right? So after Shiva again, then you offer Nechumen. So in other words, if you don't agree, we got a contradiction here. Clearly we see that he can't always initiate and respond. So the Gemara clarifies, Amar Avidi Barav, it depends. After Shiva, Braisa number 1, yeah, who shoyel b'shloim acherim. he can initiate. He can initiate because he's after the Shiva. Sha'acherim shroyim b'shalim, because truth be told, it is a formality. The other people are good. They're not in mourning. However, acherim ein shay'alim b'shloimoi. That's the second braisa. Why shehu ein shayre b'shalim? That's where we make the difference. Frag the Gemara, no. But doesn't it say Meshiv responding implies, right, that people are asking him, are wishing him Shalom Aleichem? Yeah, the Gemara says that's because they don't know. Hold on, if they don't know, hiyachi hasam nami. In other words, even if you are greeted within the first 3 days, why should you not be allowed to respond if you're given a heter since they didn't know? So the Gemara says no, that in the first 3 days, even if they don't know, hasam moedelahu. Even if they don't know, the proper thing is to notify them that you are in Avelus. Don't ignore them, but don't return. V'loy mahadalahu. Hache, meaning after 3 days, from then on is where we say that loy tzarech loy oidiinu, that you don't have to inform them. That is when you are allowed to respond because they didn't know. Gewaldik. Again, they didn't know. In this B'rai says they didn't know that you are in mourning. They didn't know today applies to people that don't know this detailed halacha of greeting someone, particularly with using the word peace, shalom. Again, in the Braisa above we learned, we're going to focus on another detail of Braisa number 1, that all of these restrictions of initiating, of responding is only within 30 days. After 30 days it says that you can say shalom, and not only that, we learned after 30 days you're not menachem aval anymore. Now I got another. We're going to call this again Braisa number 2 because we're focusing on the after shloshim. If you find your friend who's in Avelus, as long as he is within the first 12 months, now you already see the answer. Here we're speaking about father and mother. And that's the only people for whom the Avelus is 12 months. Just to make it clear, 12 months is not until the yard site, because like this year is a leap year. So if someone's parent, father or mother, God forbid, passed away, so then once 12 months are up, they are finished with the laws of Avelus, even though for them to come to the yard site, and by the way, Minek Chabad is that the yard site, even the first yard site is Miyoyim HaMisa, not Miyoyim HaKvura, and that's not Negeya here, but there's 12 months of mourning. So b'soichud beis chodesh medaber imoy tanchumim ve'enu shel b'shleimah. Don't greet, no shalom aleichem. Yes, you can say amakim minachem eschem. We're speaking about someone who didn't have the opportunity or didn't do it prior to this first encounter. Only after 12 months is where we say shel b'shleimah ve'enu medaber imoy tanchumim. And even though you're shayl b'shloimai, and even though you don't say amaki menachem eschem, still medaber imay min hatzad, which means you indirectly comfort the person, right? Without explicitly mentioning that there is a mourning over here. And furthermore, Amar Avi Meir, he's going now after 12 months. Be careful when it comes to offering words of condolences. And you medaber imay tanchumen, you might be coming from a good place, but you're doing a lot more bad than good. You're reopening a wound. The wound finally began to heal to whatever level it can heal. Don't do that. And he gives a gavaldik mashal. A person who broke a bone, broke his leg, God forbid, and now it finally healed. So imagine if a doctor finds this person and he tells him, you know what, come to me, I'm going to break it again and heal it. I'm sorry, it's healed already. Why would you break it again? Don't do a toiva, don't break it and don't reheal it. And I'll do it because I want to show you that my medicine is better than the first one. You shoita, why are you doing that? Bottom line is, what do we see over here clearly? We see that there was a concept, even during the entire Yud Beis Chodesh, not to do She'ela Shalom, and yes, to offer words of Tanchumen. So the Gemara answers like Kasha. This Braisa number 2 is speaking about the Ava Ve'imai, which is where you have dinim of Avelus for Yud Beis Chodesh. The first Braisa that put the end of 30 days, and after 30 days, you can even initiate Shalom Aleichem, you certainly can respond. After 30 days, no more words of Tanchumen. That's B'shar Kroivov. Frek the Gemara, hold on. If Braisa Nam is B'Shar Kroivav, why don't we at least say the same thing we said in Braisa number 2? What did we say in Braisa number 2? That even after the Yud Beis Chodesh, even though you don't offer words of Hamakim Menachem, but Minatzad, indirectly you refer to the Tsar and you offer the person encouragement. So Hasam Nami Yidaber Imay Tanchuma Minatzad. Why wouldn't the Braisa mention the same thing? Is it because the first Braisa does not subscribe to it? The Gemara says no, it does. No, Enochanami. Even though it's after the Shloishim, as long as you're not directly, explicitly speaking about the passing, you can offer words of condolences. And what does the first Braisa mean? It only means kedarkoi. Aval medaber imay minatzad. Oh, Chavra, let us start now. So as we mentioned in the introduction, that we learned Shmua Rechoika, Shmua Keroiva, that when you have a Shmua Keroiva, even though you were not even aware of the passing, you were not by the burial, you didn't know that your immediate relative passed away. If you find out within 30 days, including on the 30th day, then you have to keep Shiva and Shloishim. Now we're going to speak about a case where one of the immediate relatives found out about it during Shiva. Why is that Negeya? Because when he heard the news, he joined the family that was aware of it, that was by the burial, that began the Shiva immediately after the burial. Question is, can this newcomer, who's now going to be sitting with his relatives, can he end the Shiva with them? Even though that will mean that he did not sit the proper Shiva 6 days and a bit. In other words, if the chiyuv of Shiva is a chiyuv on the Gavra, that someone who's mourning has to sit for 7 days, then you got to sit 7 days. Shmua Keroiva, 7 days, 30 days. But you see, interestingly, I want to go back to what we mentioned from the Yerushalmi, that of course there is our tsar, but there is also some of the mourning is connected to the tsar of the person who passed away. Which is again why the Yerushalmi explains why the first 3 days are most intense. And he speaks about the neshama's ascent. Once the neshama to a certain degree makes peace that to this body as it is, they cannot return anymore, it began to deteriorate, that neshama begins to go up. So once the neshama begins to go up, there's less tsar that the neshama is experiencing, and therefore this person has less tsar. So it's not on the person, it's about the neshama. And the neshama, again, it's gradual. Stay still connected here during Shiva. After Shiva, when we make al-chaim, the neshama has a big aliyah then, after the Shiva. So maybe since you joined the family, you don't have to sit the full 7 days. Interesting. So let's begin the sugya, and we're going to continue this in next stuff. Tana Rabbanan, right? We're 6 lines before the bottom of the Amid. And this first opinion makes 2 preconditions. When is it that a newcomer, Take, will not have to sit the whole 7 days? Number 1, Avel Gimel Yomim Harishonim Ba Mimakim Karev. Right? The first wide line. He came within the first 3 days. And what's also important is that potentially he was only 1 day's travel distant or less. Tosfos tells us that what's called a close place with 10 parsas or less, which is the most that people travel in 1 day. In other words, since this person was, if he would have found out, he would have been able to come even on the first day, even though he didn't, and he came within the first 3 days, then he doesn't have to keep a whole Shiva. He's included in the group. Moina imahen. But even if he came within 3 days, if he lived beyond 10 parsa, even if he would have found out he wouldn't have made it for the first day, the bitter day, then amazing. If he arrived after 3 days, second wide line, even though he came mimakim karev, again with 10 parsas or less, since it's after 3 days, in other words, you have to have 2 conditions. Number 1 is you have to come within the 3 days. Number 2, you have to come from a nearby location. Again, potentially you could have come had you known by the first day. That's Tanakama. Second opinion, Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon is lenient. Rab Shimon says, Afilu ba b'yom hashvi. As long as you are coming from a nearby place, That's only one condition needed. You could have been there on day number 1. You didn't even know about it. Or you knew about it and you didn't come. Now that you are joining for any part of the Shiva, now when we say the 7th day, we know Mixas Hayom Kekule. But like we mentioned, it's not that we're going to get up 6 o'clock is dawn, 6:01. You have to wait until the regular time of davening. People normally would come either to daven Shachris with the mourners, or they would come from their shuls to go right afterwards to the house of the mourner. You know, I would say in LA it's like 8 a.m. That's when mourners get up. If they came before 8 a.m., it's enough. My name Machloikes says the Gemara.
If not, then he has to do Shiva.
The whole Shiva. Yes. Yes. Very good. Omar Mar, and I want to add, Danny, that if he found out, it's not that he didn't come. He only found out on the 6th day, let's say, according, if he would come, so then he joins them for the Shloshim. It's amazing. He's part of the group. And if not, he lost out. Omar Mar. We learned above. Tanakama holds that Gimel Yom HaRishonim. Condition number 1 is you have to come within the first 3 days. Condition number 2 is, according to the Tanakama, you have to come from a nearby place. My name, you get to count with them. Interestingly, comes the Amoraim. It's like Rashi and Chumash. And they say, no, you didn't understand Pshat. There is a 3rd condition. You have to meet the 3rd condition according to the Tanakama. Last line. Amar Rab Chia bar Abba, Amar Rab Yochanan, vehu sheyesh gadol habayis babayis. Ooh, this opens up a freiliche can of lakshin. What goes on over here? Every family has a gadol. Now, this is real family politics. Some juicy family. What? Who's the gadol? Well, many people say it's the eldest son. But it's not always that way. Sometimes the eldest son is not the most capable. And who's to determine that? And oh my God. But however it's determined, the gadol, after there is a passing, the one that's the gadol, he has to be there doing the whole Shiva. It's when do we say that you came late, but as long as you came within 3 days and you came potentially, you would have come, you could have come. That's only if the gadol of the family of the mourners is doing the whole Shiva. But if the gadol was not there, even though all the other Katanim Lech were doing Shiva, Dubis the Gadol, you got to do your own Shiva. 3 conditions. Litanakama, according to Rabbi Yochanan. 3, Karev, again, Vohu Sheyesh Gadol Habayis, Babayis. And now we're going to open up and we're going to conclude today's daf. Ibayeluhu. Now we're going to add another detail. At Khan, the example that we're giving is that someone didn't know, they didn't have communication, they only found out, let's say 2 days later. Okay, so they came late. But they came right away, they can be living an hour walk. They only found out now. What happens, and here Rabbi Yochanan is saying, if the Gadol came late, what happens if the Gadol knew there was a passing? You know what happened? And we're going to continue this in next daf. It was very common from time immemorial that even Yidden that did not have a zchus to live in the Holy Land while they were alive, they wanted to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. That was the common thing. Many Amoraim in Bavel were buried in the Holy Land. Not everyone was able to go there. It's a schlep. Now we're going to learn details how Shiva is done then. We'll speak that out in the next daf. But here, what happens if the gadol, Saket, you're the gadol, he went to the burial. All the other family members stayed behind. So what are you going to say, you Rabbi Yochanan, that since the gadol didn't sit full Shiva, here, the only reason why the gadol didn't begin with the other Ketanim is because he went to do the burial. And it took him a day to go and a day to come back. We're all going according to the Tanakama that you have to come within the first 3 days. According to Rab Shimon, there is no such restriction. Right? So he can even come as long as it comes when they're still sitting Shiva. Do we give this gadol now a little bit more of a leniency by the very fact that the only reason why he came late is not because he didn't know, it's because he was misasik in the actual burial. Let's read it. Halach gadol habayis lebeis hakvares, which is the only reason why he was not there. Let me just speak out the heads up for the next daf. That what happens is interesting, is that whoever is not going to the burial, so they don't begin Shiva until the eulogies are done. Then they would accompany the coffin, they would accompany the guf until then they would walk out of the city. Today it's common that, I remember when my grandmother passed away, so she had the zchus to be buried in the Holy Land. So it happened to be that one of her children were unable to go there for medical reasons. So everyone else went. They went to the airport. There you accompany the goof, when it leaves the place of the hesped. And then she went back home. The moment you turn your back from the hesped, that's when Shiva begins. Whoever is not going to the burial, it's whenever they finish giving the final covet that they are giving in their local city. So the Katanim went back home. They're not going. The Gadol went to the Beis HaKvaris. Mahu, that's the question. And the Gemara answers, Tashima, Domar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, Afilu halach gedoil habayis lebeis HaKvaris. The din is, Moine imahem, he will count with the other mourners. The afilu goes, even though he's not there, and Rabbi Yechanan is the one that says, you're the Gadol, you got to do your Shiva. No, we have a leniency because you were not there because you were being misasik with the covet, with the burial. Now the problem is, Rabbi Yechanan, the great Rabbi Yechanan, is an Amoida. Fragti Gemara, how can he say, you're quoting me at Rabbi Yechanan, at Moine Imam, no, Bahatanya, it says, Beferish and Abraisa, Moine la'atzmoi. So the Gemara says, yeah, because the Braisa is following the sheet of the Tanakama, that you have to come within 3 days. Don't forget that the third precondition, which is amazing, that's not mentioned in the Tana, it was only added by Rabbi Yechanan. Again, the Tanakama, you have to come within 3 days. So it clarifies the Gemara that when it says, that when Rabbi Yechanan says that you get, join them, the Asabigoy Tulasa, the senior, the Gadol, however you'll call him, that's when he gets to, so to say, join and sit less than the Shiva, personally. The Braisa is the Loy Asabigoy Tulasa, and we'll stop over here, and God willing, to be continued.